Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Hilltop at the beautiful Hayden Clark Alumni Center for the second installment of two webcasts focused on the topic of social media marketing. I'm JD D'Alfonso, Bradley University's social media coordinator. We'd first like to welcome those who are returning from last week's webcast titled Social Media 101+1, where we took a 40,000-foot view of social media marketing and broke down the general concepts of successful strategies with the help of the 36 rules of social media. Today, however, we look to dig a little deeper into more strategies. Today, we'll touch on a few more rules from the 36 rules of social media, discussing the evolving environment of digital marketing, the science of posting to the respective networks, examples of great social media posts, and some not so great ones. And with me again today is my partner in crime, Ms. Heidi Rotier. Heidi, welcome back.
Thank you, JD. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, I'm Heidi Rotier, and I serve as an instructor for the Foster College of Business's social media marketing program. We're going to have some fun today. We have plenty to share with you, and we're excited to have a discussion with you. Because this is a webcast based on social media, let's walk the walk and use the social media network for conversation and questions. We encourage our viewers to contribute to conversation today using the hashtag BradleyLive on Twitter.
Yes, please tweet using hashtag today to start or add to the ongoing discussion. Plus, we will be fielding questions during the webcast today using our handy iPads. We do have time allotted at the end for the Q&A session, so if we don't get to your question during the webcast, we will answer it at the end of today's program.
All right, last week we had a great discussion with our audience, and our goal today is to add to it. Aside from our drafted agenda, we're bringing some questions from last week back for a discussion today. But before we get to that, let's take a look at how digital marketing has evolved over the years. This will help shape exactly how important social media marketing is nowadays and why now is the perfect time to utilize it as a major marketing tool.
All right, let's dive into some numbers real quick to highlight the rise of social media marketing. Let's take a trip back to the early 2000s. This newfangled electronic mail service has emerged to us, and marketers can now pay to send mass amounts of emails to clients and potential customers. The open rate for email marketing was 37%. In 2011, only 17%.
Stepping back in time even further, thank you for giving me the older one, to the 1990s. Banner advertisements are now used to market products and companies. Click-through rates sat at a comfortable 3%. In 2010, you're lucky to get 0.1% for a click-through rate.
Okay. Now, let's add to the statistics. Here is a fun fact. It took 30 years for 50 million people to gain access to a radio. For television, it took 13 years to reach 50 million users. Instagram, just a year and a half.
Well, what does that mean? It means that as newer technology emerges and new mediums present themselves, it's key to see which direction marketing opportunities can shift.
So why is social media emerging as the newest, hottest marketing platform? Think about this. Today, roughly 1 in 4 people say they use social media to inform people of purchasing decisions. Some believe that number could be as high as 1 in 2 people in 5 years. Now, if social media guru Gary Vaynerchuk is tuning in, 2 things are now happening. 1, I've become incredibly nervous. And 2, his newest book may have some more sales. This last note was about the purchasing decisions on social media, came from his latest book, Jab, 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 Right Hook. It's a book that doesn't leave my side nowadays and is a gold mine for social media marketing insights. Many of our examples are supported by his remarks in this book.
All right, here's another fun fact for you. Baby boomers, the generation that controls 70% of U.S. spending, increased their social use 42% in 1 year. So again, what does this suggest? Well, with the drastic shift toward mobile devices, social use can only rise. Noticing that increase, plus the introduction of wearable technology, social media will be with us at all times.
Think about it. How many of you watching right now sit at home and watch television with 1 or more mobile devices around you? Okay? And if your program you're watching is not DVR'd, by this I mean you have commercials to watch, how many of you revert to your mobile devices, such as your cell phones, your tablets, even laptops, during the paid commercials? Remember, people are paying big money for commercial slots, and many of people aren't even paying attention to them anymore.
And in my case, I let it go because I'm already on my mobile device when I'm watching DVR television. Hopefully, a few of these statistics and some fun facts have caught your attention as to why social media marketing truly matters if you want to be a successful marketer. From here, we'd like to jump into a few more of the 36 rules of social media as we highlight some more examples from strong marketing campaigns. And just as a reminder, feel free to add to this discussion with hashtag #BradleyLive. So let's take a look at some of the rules we'll be covering today.
Rule number 14, everyone's an influencer.
Rule number 27, don't use ads to prop up boring content. Use ads to accelerate successful content.
22, desktop is conquered territory. Mobile is the battlefield. Number 8 is always write back. And number 12 is not everything will work, and that's just fine.
All right. So our first rule today then is actually rule number 14. Rule number 14 is everyone's an influencer. But what does that mean? Like we emphasized last week, and we'll be talking a lot about it again today, social media is the only media that the consumer has the opportunity to really have a two-way conversation with an identity, which means that everyone has power to influence you and your brand. Give people the power to become an influencer, and people are always talking about you anyway. If you make them feel important, if you give them something to talk about, that's what they like. Operationally, we need to have our ducks in a row and encourage them to want to talk about us. People talk about their interaction with the brand, and the brand creates other content worth mentioning that will also get shared.
Right, and so we brought to you again some examples. Our first one comes from actually last week when we talked about social media, not just being on branding social media, not just on social media online, but also through other means of mediums. So we actually go back to the Ford Fiesta movement, the example here. What can you tell us about how it relates to influencing?
Well, one of the things that Ford has been very active in, we talked about this last week, was they have had great social media efforts for all of their latest product launches. But one of the things that Ford also knew was that all of the behind the scenes things in the company had to be working before they dove into the social space. So they were careful to make sure they made great cars, that they were financially solvent, that they had great leadership. One of the most important things Ford knew was that inside of the company everything was working. Their big job was just to get people outside of the company to talk about Ford again.
Right, that's a great example. I think they do a fantastic job. It's talking about getting all your ducks in a row, and they made sure of that beforehand. Our next example goes back to the Super Bowl just recently played. It was Budweiser and their viral video that went online. And what happened to be going with the Clydesdale and the Golden Retriever puppy, or the Golden Lab rather, I'm not sure. And if you know the premise of it, if you're one of the 45 million people to view it, I know some people haven't, but it goes through a story of a puppy escaping his breeder and going and making a new friend. As it goes on, how could you say none of that face anyways? As it goes on, the puppy gets bought by a stranger, or not the story you want it to go. And the Clydesdale go and rescue it. All right, this is the general story. Comes back happy, everybody's excited. Okay, what happens here is Budweiser starts a communication before the Super Bowl commercial airs. This airs on January 29th, rather than February 2nd, I believe, is when the game was played. So with that, now the social buzz is going on. Now people are talking about Budweiser. They always have a good commercial that comes out, and they nailed it again. They had two commercials, but this is one that really stood out. So now, not only are they promoting their product during the big game, now they are using it to promote your beverage of choice, possibly, on the big game. So that's what happened there. And from that, they get 48 million views as of today, which was, I think, close to 25 or 35, I forget which number, of the day of the Super Bowl. So they had all that exposure and the influence, not just of what the emotional appeal they brought to the table, but the discussion that happened afterwards. And now their customers and their clients, or just people who are fans of a good story, are now influencing their product. And so you can see there on the bottom tab there, it's January 29, 2014. And so you can see it was a few days before. And actually, all the big companies really put out their commercials ahead of time so you can see it. Hopefully, and just to start the chatter, start the influence. And so that's where it started. Our next example goes from last week as well. It brings back the WestJet example from the Canadian airline. If you know anything about this, the passengers ahead of time scan their boarding pass, and on the other side of the box, Santa Claus appeared to ask you what you wanted for Christmas. Now, as they flew across Canada, it was about a 4-hour flight, I believe, the employees of WestJet went out and bought all the requests that the people had, from socks and underwear to big screen TVs. So when they arrived at their destination, you saw Santa Claus was there, and you saw all of the gifts come down the baggage claim. And so everybody was happy. It was a surprise. Nobody was expecting it. What that generated was here 35 million views during the Christmas season. All right, so promoting their product, and I'm sure it's WestJet, as I told you last week. WestJet doesn't know this, and they can't measure this yet. But if I was to fly in Canada, my airline of choice is now WestJet. Just seeing what they do, because you can see the discussion, the influence they've impacted on just people who aren't even customers, but get to see a great story.
Yep.
So we have one more that attributes to who everyone's an influencer. That comes from IKEA in an Instagram account. So can you show her what you found here?
Okay, so what this example was, IKEA was sending out a new catalog, and there's always a lot of buzz when new merchandise comes out, and they wanted to make that talk come from the people who love IKEA's products. And so they asked their customers to take a photo to Instagram the item in the new catalog that they liked the best, and to share it and include a hashtag with it. And what that meant for the customers was they got to say what their favorite new items were. They also had the opportunity to be entered into a drawing where they might win that item. They had one winner per week that would win the item that they Instagrammed. And ultimately, over the course of 4 weeks, the whole entire catalog was put on the Instagram account so that people now had a new way to shop. They could look through on Instagram and see all of the new merchandise, much like they would look at a catalog.
Yes, I think that's a great way. I think they're influencing their customers to really engage, tell their story. And that's what Gary tells a lot in his book, is sharing the story correctly, making people tell you how good you are instead of just you telling them how good you are. So that's a great way they've adapted that technique. We'll close out with this rule here from a quote I read from Seth Godin, that I think ties in well with the topic of influencing. Seth reminds us a series of questions. Is my price low enough? Is it reliable enough? Do I offer enough features? Am I on the right social media channels? Is the website cool enough? Am I promising enough? No, the most important question in marketing something to someone who hasn't purchased it before is, do they trust me enough to believe my promises? Without that, you have nothing. He says, earn trust, earn trust, earn trust, then you can worry about the rest. And I think that's exactly what influence is really talking about. And so it came out this week, and I thought this ties in pretty well with what we're trying to say. I mean, how can people trust your promises? Well, if people are telling you that they can trust you, that really takes care of it yourself. So I think it says that an influencer, you're an influencer, and your customers are also influencer. Pretty much the big picture.
Yes.
All right, so let's move on to our next rule today, which is number 27. Don't use ads to prop up boring content. Use ads to accelerate successful content. So what can we say about this one here?
All right, well, there are lots of reasons to use advertising in social media, and it's always a two-part deal. If you're going to spend money to broadcast your message to a specific group of people, for instance, on Twitter allows you to customize your advertising so that you can target people by those that are tweeting from a certain location, who are using mobile versus non-mobile devices, whatever platform, so whether it's an Apple product or an Android product, people who are using certain keywords, who express certain interests. All of that targeting ability gives us a great opportunity to reach exactly the group of people that we want to reach. But we never want to do that just all by itself. We want to have a chance to, once we've got the eyes of and ears of a particular group of people, that we can then direct them to more information about the organization. We give them more value. And so that's where a couple of our examples come in today.
Yes.
And the first one is from
Callaway. Yes. Okay. This is from a LinkedIn opportunity, a campaign, which is something not a lot of people get to talk about, but they did such a great job on a platform or a network that you don't necessarily see people running campaigns on. And I think it does a great job, as what you mentioned earlier, I think it's, talking about a sport that I think a lot of business people play. You always talk about that stereotype. So what exactly did they do here?
So they wanted to play on the fact that people on LinkedIn are professionals, and professionals network and like to play golf together, and it's a perfect fit. So this was a campaign leading up to the US Open in 2013, and what they decided to do was allow people to create sort of their fantasy foursome, so the group of people that they would love to play golf with. And they could do that through their LinkedIn connections. And they could invite their friends to be a part of their fantasy foursome. And this message, this campaign was broadcast through a series of LinkedIn advertisements as well as in-mails, targeted in-mails to people who listed a participation in golf discussion groups or expressed an interest in their profile in liking golf. And so as a part of this, if they created their foursome and submitted it to Callaway, they had an opportunity to get a free sample of a new product from Callaway, which was their Hex Chrome Plus golf ball. And one winning team who won the sweepstakes had the opportunity to travel to Callaway headquarters. They were all fitted with custom golf clubs and had an opportunity to play a round of golf together.
Oh,
great prize for people that like business and like golf.
A good story of using promoted ads, that LinkedIn platform. I think it's great. Our next example is one of the examples we talked about that is not so great. And to us, we had a good laugh and we were shocked at the same time. And this was actually a promoted tweet from a user, a person, not just a business, but he spent $1,000 of his own money.
Crazy.
To really take it to British Airways here. And we'll see what British Airways did, and you can see, I think it's common sense as to why it's a bad example. And it really ties into everyone's an influencer. Now he's actually promoting things with his own money. So HVSVN says, don't fly British Airways, their customer service is horrendous. Promoted. So he's paid money for it. And so now we see an interaction. I'm going to let you take over here and see what British Airways responded. And I think we'll go dissect it from there.
All right, classic example of what not to do. British Airways responds, sorry for the delay in responding. Our Twitter feed is open 9 to 5. Please DM your baggage reference and we'll look into this. So rather than saying, apologizing, identifying, sympathizing, any of those good ings that we like to do, they said, hey, contact us another way. Not cool. And so the customer responds, how does a billion-dollar company only have 9 to 5 social media support for a business that operates 24/7? DM me yourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can see it goes on. What does he say?
Yeah, we can't direct message you. You aren't following us. If you'd like assistance, we'll still need your baggage reference. And he says, very frustrated, clearly, I've been following you already. Did you even bother to check?
Yes. And I mean, to say that your Twitter feed is active for 9 to 5, a business day. One of the 36 rules, if you look them up, you can Google the 36 rules, you can see plenty of examples. It's the same document that we're using today. One of the rules is social is 24/7. And so you're breaking one of the rules. They don't know they're breaking one of these 36 rules that we found. But Twitter is especially 24/7, and that's why mobile is so popular. We get to that in the future, but this is just a poor example of what British Airways does to solve a problem.
And to bring us back to, in support of our point about how powerful paid advertising is, if you look at the statistics this gentleman achieved, almost 77,000 people saw his tweet that he paid for. Being upset with British Airways, and 14.6 thousand people engaged with him, all for $1,000. So for very little money, he got a lot of support for his bad British Airways experience. And I think the message that we really took away from this in part was, not only do you need to make sure your customer service is well in hand, but number two, if one individual can spend $1,000 of his own money and get this far in terms of promotion with a paid promoted tweet, how far could your brand get if they were spending this money strategically, deliberately, creatively? That message could go an awful long way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And especially since we're moving from desktop to mobile, it leads up to our next rule here, which is number 22. Desktop is conquered territory. Mobile is a battlefield. There's ways to advertise on mobile just as there is the desktop, and that's where people are moving. Let's see here. Imagine, we're going to go back to the example that I gave you earlier today, which is, where is your phone? Where is your mobile devices? They're usually within arm's reach. If you're out for dinner or drinks, all right, and you look around, all right, you're with you and your significant other, or you and a buddy, just two of you, okay? You look around, a lot of people are on their phones at all times. Social engagements, and they're being antisocial. But that's the way it is. That's the reality of what marketing is today. And it's for you to take advantage of that. You see where people are looking at all times. If you were to put in a scenario, if you're at a restaurant and it's just you and somebody else, and the other person excuses themselves to go to the restroom or something, what is your first move? Take out your cell phone. You can see almost everybody do it. If you don't do it, I'm sure you do, but you can see other people do exactly that. So that's their first move when they're by themselves, is to take out the mobile phone. So that's where the battleground really shows to be. And so with that, we have, I believe, a few more examples of what we have. You brought to the table a Weather Channel one, or excuse me, here's a great statistic that I wanted to bring, a last-minute slide that was entered to show the percentage of Black Friday online sales was 21.8% of total Black Friday sales on 2013 were via mobile. Tablets accounting for 14.4% and smartphones 7.2% of the online sales respectively. That's from TechCrunch. So you can see that this is great. I mean, this is just last year. This is Black Friday. So you can see mobile is really, really striding. And so this is where you can really take advantage. The Weather Channel example you talked about earlier this week when we were together was a great example. How do they use mobile ads?
Well, the Weather Channel has really, they sort of rebranded themselves as the weather company, and a part of that is the research they're doing on how people use the weather. And if you think about it, one of the other things you probably do is you're thinking about your day is, well, what's the weather going to be today? I know we always have those conversations in our house surrounding what are we going to do, what's the weather like? And the weather company knows this. And so they have started selling advertisements to brands and allowing brands to match up what they advertised with what's going on in the weather. So one of the companies that has taken advantage of this is Pantene. And Pantene knows that on particularly humid days, people whose hair responds differently to humidity are going to want to take measures and getting ready that morning to use different hair care products to make sure they look good all day, even in high humidity. And so they bought advertising to show up on the Weather Channel app. As people get up in the morning and they check the weather, they see, oh, humidity is going to be high today. They also see an advertisement on their phone from Pantene that reminds them about products specifically designed to make your hair look great in high humidity.
Right. That's targeting. I mean, that's exactly what the ability is now on the mobile devices. Exactly.
I think one of the other things that comes from this sensibility about mobile is to make sure that we're just ready in the mobile space. At the very least, we want to make sure that our websites are optimized for mobile. We want to make sure that all of the posting we do on social media can be seen well. I know one of Gary Vee's points is to make sure the text isn't too small. If you put text on a picture, make sure that you can see it on a mobile phone screen because it's automatically smaller. Another big player in the mobile space is Pinterest. And if you know me at all, I love Pinterest. It's one of my favorite things to do with my free time. And one of the most powerful things that comes from Pinterest, though, is mobile usage. More people access Pinterest via a mobile device than any other. So that's a really high percentage. Something like 75% of our usage for Pinterest comes from a mobile device. Add to that the fact that our behavior from Pinterest is we see things we like and we buy things. And I'll say I'm guilty as charged here. I have seen a pin and gone and bought said pin. So that high correlation means not only do we need to be on mobile, we need to be on Pinterest, but that's going to lead to direct action on the part of our customers. Really, really important.
Right, I think it is. And I'm not particularly on Pinterest, but I respect the fact that a lot of people are. I understand what it does, and there's promising aspects for it for the right placement. And we'll get to that later. We have a slide to talk about Pinterest later again, and we'll go into some more details. And I'm going to let you take the reins on that one. But I'll let you introduce the next rule here we have, number 8.
All right, number 8 is always write back. And this is an area for me that I've become really passionate about is customer service through social media. And if you think about it, the best way to start a dialogue with someone is to respond to the questions and comments that they have. Even if somebody compliments us and we simply say, thank you, we appreciate your business. It's a really simple way to acknowledge that user, to include them, to make them one of us, to be a part of the conversation. The best way to end a dialogue is to just ignore somebody. That changes the conversation back to a one-way kind of a deal. And nobody likes that. So one of the things that we know is the challenges for businesses responding to requests for support in the social space. And about 70% of requests and posts from customers go unanswered.
That's interesting. And they wouldn't be reached out on those networks, don't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so only answering 30% of our questions and comments, that's not a great return. And this is just sort of across the board, doesn't matter what industry you're in.
Yeah, but we have a graphic here to you to talk about the customer service channel, which brands are taking Twitter seriously as a customer service channel. Gary Vaynerchuk says he always likes to look through his feed. 98% of his time is responding to people, not necessarily pushing all his stuff out there. So you can see here, and Heidi, you shared this with me, I'll let you take it, but you see what Verizon's doing as well as American Airlines.
Yeah, so what this study does is it looked at how many times these brands responded to customers and how they did so. Did they respond to them in network, which is what most people prefer, and did they handle the situation right on Twitter? If the people came to them on Twitter, they handled it on Twitter. And you can see then we have, Chili's down toward the farther end, only responding to 56%. That means most the other times, if they responded, they asked for customers to move toward a different channel. And the challenge here is nearly a third of our customers are going to come to us in social networks. And the younger our customer base is, the more likely it is that they're going to come to us on social. So we want to make sure that not only do we respond to them and respond all the time, always right back, but we want to make sure that we can, as much as possible and where privacy permits, handle those questions right inside the network. We don't direct people to other places.
Right, exactly. Answer them 24/7. Throughout the week, and unlike British Airways, unless you went just 8 hours a day, you can contact them. They're not on this list, obviously. Then it's one thing to say monitoring what's going on and seeing how people you're responding to 99%, 98% of people's questions or reach outs. It's doing so in the positive and negative, and doing it in a way that can help, or just acknowledging it. We talked about a crisis plan, having a crisis plan. If something does go wrong, it helps not just to be able to solve the problem, but to show that something is going on. Exactly. And how to solve the problem, make people feel more comfortable in it. Let people know that the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. You made that great point last week, and so having be able to have that customer service channel and that friendly touch on social media, I think just takes it one step further. It really emphasizes and it influences people as we go back to rule number 14. Yeah. Now, you also mentioned something about Dell. You said that they take the critical comments that they get, and what do? They have focus groups?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting strategy. Dell's been working on a comprehensive social media strategy for a long time, and one of the last things that they've done, or most recent things, is when people are critical of Dell, and that kind of happens because nobody likes it when their technology goes to pieces, but they invite those users who have expressed disappointment and disgust and had problems with Dell. They bring them in for focus groups, and they get their feedback. They give them a chance to speak out, and then they take that information. It's great information, and incorporate it into customer service feedback. They do product improvements. They use it as a means of market research to learn what they can do better the next time around.
Exactly. Yes, and I think it's great. I mean, really taking the criticism and then bring them in.
Yep.
You don't like this. How can we fix it? Yeah, and you have a Lowe's example. You're talking about, I think they use Vine.
Yep.
What do they do with Vine?
Well, so Vine is a much more recent iteration in terms of social media. And Vine, for those of you who are not familiar with it, uses 6-second video clips on Twitter, and they circle continuously through. And so it has limited applications for some brands, but Lowe's has found a way to use it. They call it Lowe's Fix in 6, and they're able to fix and solve common problems for their customers in as little as 6 seconds through a Vine video. So this is a great example. You see a screenshot there. This little video just highlights how you can make painting easier by covering your paint tray with foil, and then the cleanup process, all you have to do is wad up the foil and throw it away.
Yes, yeah. And going back, I'm going to skip around a little bit. When you talk about Pinterest, we talk about it later. Lowe's and these companies, these big corporations, I think can really take advantage of something like that. And that's measuring what you're good at, and they're taking it to Vine and Pinterest, as long as the big three, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. And they can easily tap into a bunch of different ones. I think they have a niche in which they can really reach out and take advantage. And the resources. Also helps to have the resources. We're going to transition to our last rule of the day for the most part. Is number 12. Not everything works, and that's just fine. We have some great examples here, especially one that I think in the national news. Why don't you tell us a little bit the overview of what this rule means?
Well, the big thing about social media is that sometimes it's a trial and error process. So there are things that are going to work and there are things that are not going to work. Social media is highly customized. What works for one audience and one brand doesn't necessarily translate into another audience and another brand. But don't give something up entirely when it doesn't work. Look at what did work and then try again. One of the big things that we are trying to do is let dialogue happen. So if we try something and it's ineffective, then we use that as a means to learn from it and change and do something differently the next time. Sometimes the reason things don't work is a difference in your fan base, or they're just timing is all wrong, or we didn't think about all of the contingencies that could happen. Our tendency is to want perfect all the time.
Yes.
And that's just not possible. But flaws and error, that's human, that's normal. And I think people are okay with, they'll accept that in the social space because it's natural, it's authentic, it's genuine. But it's what happens next and how we handle it, how do we respond, that's truly important.
A little bit of a crisis plan that goes into it as well.
Exactly.
So we have an example here that made some headline news across the nation. JP Morgan tried to reach out to their Twitter base and to open a Q&A. A lot of people, Reddit does Ask Me Anythings, and Twitter is trying to do these live chats and just really using the hashtag. And so this is great because I have some responses from people. You see, what career advice would you ask a leading exec at a global firm? Tweet a question using hashtag AskJPM. On 11/14, a leader takes over JP Morgan. So one of their employees is going to answer questions. They had no idea what kind of questions they would come in. So JP Morgan, again, it's a Twitter takeover. On 11/14, Vice Chairman Jimmy Lee takes over JP Morgan to answer questions. Use hashtag AskJPM to tweet a question. Well, this did not go in their favor. Considering the recent recession and the recovery we're going through, people were not happy, especially those who are on Twitter and maybe have lost their homes. So some of the examples we saw that happened today, some of the responses were, "Can I have my house back?" Hashtag AskJPM. The next one, "What's the best way to get bloodstains out of a clown suit?" Hashtag JPM. That's a mean tweet. And then the last one, there was a number of these, but I picked 3 of my favorites today. And does the sleaze wash out with a regular shower, or do you have to use something special like baby tears? Hashtag AskJPM. People are upset. and there's some rules or some lessons they learned from this experience. But they responded back, I think, in the best way they could have in damage control, which was tomorrow's Q&A is canceled, bad idea, back to the drawing board. Okay, they're talking like a human would.
Yep.
They've realized it's not a good idea. This isn't going to be working that well. So we're just going to retract this first plan, and then we're going to go back to the drawing board. So I think they handled it the best way they could have, but it was still a bit of a failure. But that's fine. They can approach something else in a different fashion.
Sometimes the best course of action is just to bow out gracefully.
Exactly, and that's what they did. Yeah. Now, we've had, over the week, some questions that have come in or topics that have been brought up on the Twitter feed or just questions after the first webcast. And we really want to touch on, Instagram, Pinterest, Google+, LinkedIn. And so we have a couple slides here that aren't necessarily the examples, but some of the stuff that we found, so statistics or highlights that we can talk about. General usage for the most part. We're maybe going back up to that 40-foot level, but we wanted to touch on these. So we have a couple slides here, and we first want to start with Instagram. And we have some statistics for you here that I think really resonate the importance. As I said, a year and a half to gain 50 million followers, okay? But the monthly active Instagram users are 150 million. And you can read here, a percentage of users logging in at least once a day is 70%.
Huge.
Huge numbers there. And remember, Instagram is now owned by Facebook.
Yes.
So you hear all this talk about teenagers leaving Facebook and going to Instagram. Well, it's essentially going from Facebook to Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook's okay. Don't worry about that.
It's okay. Yeah. So we know that high school students between the ages of, or the high school juniors and seniors, the people that we sometimes poll and study here at Bradley University, the increase in Instagram usage for them, their demographic alone, has doubled over the last 3 years. And it started at 20% a couple years ago, and it's now up to 42% this year, those who use it daily or you have an account. You can see the average number of daily posts on Instagram alone is 55 million. And the percentage of teens that claim that Instagram is their favorite social network, about 1 in 4, 23%. Okay, and this, for the business side of things, the number of Fortune 500 companies on Instagram now is 25%. So you see the big corporations and transitioning into it. And Bradley University has one as well. They're trying to boost up the content we push out. One was of the Red Sea last night as we took on number 2, Wichita State. So that's how big Instagram was. We didn't really touch on Instagram last week,
yeah.
And so we really want to touch base. And so it's really a growing social network with a lot of potential, and with the incorporation of videos and direct photos, and now the tagging, it's really making a stride, and people enjoy it, and that's where the crowd is.
Yeah, I think especially too that with Instagram having video, you have some of those same applications that we looked at, for instance, with Vine in terms of solving problems, answering questions and things. You have a little bit longer, it's 15 seconds of video, and it's amazing. I'm always blown away when I watch some of these really short video clips, how much information you can get into such a short period of time, and really how helpful or useful or entertaining it can be in 15 seconds worth.
Exactly. Yeah. Another statistic I read, it's not on this slide, but because the integration with Facebook and Twitter, or Facebook and Instagram, 9 out of 10 Instagram videos that are shared, they're shared on Facebook.
Yep,
and so
not
you can
a surprise.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So you can see the sharing, it just gets pushed even further. So that's showing the promise there. Let's move on. We have another slide on LinkedIn, and the reason I brought this in is because John Greenhill, our director and producer and all things technology today, posted the live stream from last week onto his LinkedIn profile, and from that we got a question or a comment that was well constructed. His name is Roland, and he says, great stuff. But he brought to the table some questions and concerns I figured we could approach today. So I'm going to read a little bit about Roland brought to the table. He says, I'm thoroughly puzzled, though, how so few resources authorities present Google Plus as a prime consideration for social media activity for business. It seems as though most authorities speak on Google Plus as Google's answer to Facebook, and not so much more. But SEO value set aside, are these authorities aware of Google's business tools, offers, places, biz pages, groups, communities, etc.? It's kind of Twilight Zone-y to be a marketer in today's internet. I sometimes wonder if I'm barking up the wrong tree. He goes on to say, the broadcast was quite valuable and addressed in the nature of Twitter and Facebook, but I have my doubts as to whether they will continue to reign as the two biggies, quote unquote, as the authorities' books, in the authorities' books. From what I hear, some express the top socials are Facebook, Google+, and YouTube, completely putting Twitter at fourth position. Depending on perspectives, each of the platforms have their values, but for entrepreneurs and small businesses, I think that the necessary ones are Google+, YouTube, and LinkedIn, not necessarily in that order, and not eliminating any. What does anybody else think? So, Roland, that was great feedback, and I appreciate your question and discussion. And so, talking about that, there's different ways. Like we mentioned before, first off the bat, there's right places to move towards, when trying to access a presence. Only go where you think you can dedicate 100% and you can be good with. So when we talk about Facebook and Twitter, for us at Bradley University, we know a lot of high school seniors and juniors are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. They're not necessarily on LinkedIn. So some of our efforts go mainly towards our big three, I guess. Not the big three, but our big three. Right. And Google Plus is... People do. You make a good point. People only compare it as their answer for Facebook, and that's not necessarily, I think, the right idea. I think it's going to be used totally differently, and I think what makes that much differently, as Gary mentioned in the chapter here, he has one page dedicated to Google+, but he makes a great point in saying that with wearable technology, if Google Glass really takes off the way it does, that's where it will really send. I mean, there are 500 million users profiles on Google+, but they're all dormant. Nobody's using those, and I think that's on the Google Plus page. But LinkedIn, however, I'm going to keep going here, Heidi. I have a shout out to my friend Gil Rogers, who I talked to yesterday. He says the best way for LinkedIn, for really to tackle LinkedIn, is, it's a place it's a professional environment, obviously, right? There's ways to really connect with professionals in your field, in your profession, and. Sure. And from that, Gil set a perfect example of saying you can go to a conference. He can pay to go to a conference for his company and present his material to 40 people in one room, right? Closed, compact room. He posted an article last week that reached about 4,000 people. Wow. So now what he could say in a conference can now be posted really across LinkedIn to the communities that want to read it and give feedback. So that's the way LinkedIn, going back to this slide, can really attribute to campaigns, not just individually, but not just for businesses, but individuals. What do you think about the uses for LinkedIn, and how have you seen them change in recent times? Well,
the thing about LinkedIn is I think people come to LinkedIn to get work done, right? I go to Facebook because I want to play, because I want to socialize, because I want to interact. And I go to LinkedIn because that's where I can make business connections. And so while I may not spend as much time there, the time that I do spend on LinkedIn and the time that our customers or prospective customers are spending on LinkedIn is really high quality in terms of they are ready to learn about my company or learn about my products, learn about my services, and that can go somewhere. And I think that's the true value in LinkedIn is if we nurture the relationships that we have there, if we post questions in groups, if we share articles, we are targeting that information at exactly the right kind of people who share our interests and who have needs that our organizations and that we can personally meet. That is the great use of LinkedIn, is that the intent is there and people are there to work and get work done.
Exactly, yes. And one more thing to add, I think Gil made a good point in how do you get really moving? How do you motivate yourself to be on LinkedIn all the time, to really step into it? And he says, I use it for my news source. It's the first place I really look into during the day. You know, I am now following things that attribute to my profession, my interests, and now I go there in the morning, I read up on the Chronicle of Education, I read on the news sources that are producing material that pertains to me. And so now it's a morning routine for him. And as you get more into the routine, I believe you make it more of a routine to post and share content yourself, as well as connect with those around you. Now, I want to apologize, Heidi. I read this question from Roland, and I skipped back to LinkedIn. I'm bouncing all the way around. But did you have any thoughts on what Roland kind of brought to the table here on the big three being Facebook, Google+, and YouTube? How might you approach that?
Ooh, let's see. Well, I think...
Would you put Twitter in the fourth position?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think it depends on who we're talking about.
Right.
And what kind of information they're looking at. I see a lot of people talking about, you know, the changes in how people are using social media. You know, you reference, oh, teenagers aren't on Facebook anymore. Well, teenagers are on Facebook less. It's not that they aren't on Facebook. They're spending less time there, but they also have a lot of choices. They have a lot of places that they can choose to spend their time, including just a direct text message with their friends. And so I think that that's a big part of this equation and how these social networks, you know, where people spend time and the way that our time is distributed across them. Twitter may be fourth, but that may just be the fourth thing we get to. That, you know, we've added in other networks and our time is distributed over more choices. So I still think it serves a vital purpose for certain kinds of customers and certain kinds of information.
Right.
And then I think we mentioned last week is that, you know, Twitter is fast, Twitter is, you know, short spurts of little bits and pieces, and Facebook is more informational, more detailed. Blogging and LinkedIn are probably even more detailed than that. And so it's kind of picking and choosing what's best for our message and for whom we're speaking to.
Right. I think you make a great point there. You know, I think you don't put Google Plus out of the race yet. I think they're waiting for their biggest technology to come through.
Yeah.
And as I think I mentioned earlier, with the evolvement of wearable technology, I think
Yes.
Google Glass will make or break it, possibly.
Yeah.
And because it's going to be everywhere we go, and Google Glass is really going to push this Google Plus network. You know, I'm sure it'll have features to push to Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and all that. Especially since YouTube's owned by Google.
Yep.
But you automatically sign up for a Google Plus account for any of the systems or any of the products Roland was talking about, the biz pages, the offers, the places, anything, or the tools that you sign up for,
Yeah.
you get a Google Plus account. So it makes it easier, but the 500 million is a little bit, I think, you know, not what it seems. I think it's a little inflated.
As they say, I know when I ask students, when was the last time you've been to your Google Plus page, they kind of,
Yeah, I know it. I'm going to make it a challenge. I think a challenge for the 40 days coming up is going to be post to Google Plus every day.
All
I'm
right.
going to dig into it, so I'm going to place
I'll
a
be
challenge
watching.
on myself.
all right.
Okay, we have a, let's see here, back to LinkedIn real quick. I'm sorry, we're going to go to Pinterest.
Okay.
I know this is your forte,
All right.
all right? And so I'm going to hand it over to you, but just an overview of what you see in Pinterest and how businesses could use it. Is it worth your time? How do you manage something like that? What do you think about it?
The thing that works exceptionally well for Pinterest is pictures. And especially if they're pictures of anything photography, family, recipe, food, cooking, DIY related. If there is something about your business that's visual that you can share, Pinterest is a great place to do that. And especially if you're reaching women, depending on who's doing what study and what exactly they're measuring. They look at the audience of Pinterest as being sometimes as high as 90% women. And so that's a great market if we're looking to sell products to women, and that's a great place to be. The other thing is that it's very high quality time. People spend a lot of time on Pinterest and they share a lot of things. There's a potential for material to go a long direction. About 80% of pins are repins. So it's somebody that says, "Ooh, I like that," and they pin it, and it's come from somebody else who said, "Ooh, I like that," and they pinned it.
Yeah.
So there's the viral nature on Pinterest is huge.
Yes.
And on the outside, we mentioned it before, but I'll just point to it again. Pinterest, in terms of purchase intent, it has one of the highest. People see things on Pinterest and they go buy stuff. And they spend a lot of money. The only social group where they spend more money when they see things is on Polyvore. So Pinterest is number 2. I see something, I buy, and the dollar value is generally very high.
Right. Yes. Yeah, it's something I just, recent home buyer, I've actually found myself on Pinterest more often, looking at the home improvement options that you can have. So we are now about at the 45-minute mark here, so we want to designate about 15 minutes or 10 minutes to Q&A. And we have 2 questions on hashtag Bradley Live right now. Feel free to submit any questions you have through the hashtag Bradley Live, and we'll get to them. Right now we have the first question was posited by Rachel Fogel. What's your advice for a social media bully, in parentheses, another organization, who is on your social media site every day putting it down? So it's another company or a competitor is what I'm picking up here, and not necessarily promoting you, but influencing it in a negative fashion. How do you deal with that? That's a great question, and this is something I've never really approached before, but to go off my first instinct, my advice was to, my favorite wins are when you're more sarcastic than the other person. Okay. I think if you have the opportunity to really show it to them in a sarcastic, friendly way, you don't really want to start a war, but much like you saw in a brief way what JCPenney in our last example last week, they tweeted with mittens during the Super Bowl game as part of the cold with the football game, and Coors Light and Snickers responded back with their motto or their taglines, kind of sticking it to the gibberish that JCPenney was putting out. That's not necessarily the bullying because it's not there every day, but to have a reaction, to come back and say sarcastically, something else, or have that mindset, I think that's my favorite way I've seen it. But if they're continuous, you can block them. If it's hurting your business and it's not credible feedback and it's false and it's not really valuable to anybody, try and get rid of them the best you can. You can report them in some way, or try and eliminate them in other fashions. Do you have any take on it?
I think you give it a couple shots professionally, right? Answer professionally and try to diffuse the situation as much as possible. And at some point, you may just have to let it go and just realize that not nearly as many people are seeing this banter or this bullying, as you call it, as you are. And so address it professionally, always take a professional tack, maybe respond to everything that they present, but I wouldn't drag it out or let it go on forever. Pretty much move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, it looks like we have a question from the chat. And it says, wow, pretty professional of British Airways. Not. Did they respond to him actually following them? And I have a feeling they didn't. And we don't have specific visuals for you or anything, but it is my understanding that they did not reach out to this customer aside from that interaction and following him, following through on this particular concern.
Yeah, I think that goes back to Rachel's question too. He paid money to get that.
Yeah.
I think the next move for them, since they dropped the ball on that one, the next one is if they get his number, his ticket number, they probably have access to his information at that point, registered data in the flight log or whatever system they have. I think a phone call at that point is necessary. I think you stray away from the social media at that point. That's what I think they should have done. Whether they did do it or not, I'm not sure, but at that point, it's hopeless, I think, on social media. Yeah. So we have another question here from Christy for the clarification. What's your advice to manage old negative content from years ago but are still impacting things currently? It's interesting. I'm trying to think of an example for that. What's your advice to managing old negative content from years ago but are still impacting things currently? Let's see here. If it's depending on how long ago it is, and it's still a problem with the business, or it's a solution that can be had, I think I think fixing the problem, and then making a point to let people know that it's been solved.
Yes.
It goes back to saying left hand knowing what the right hand is doing. I said, okay, we've had these complaints, these negative comments come in the past. We are taking motives to fix the solution, and we'll keep you up to date on the process. And then when it is actually solved, then you can promote it again. You can let them know this problem has been fixed. Thank you for your feedback. It's helped us grow as a business or a corporation or charity, and then we move forward from there.
And I think, too, from an outsider looking in at that kind of situation, what they see is somebody's dragging up dirt, right? And if you come back professionally and say, look, we understand that this was a problem, and this is the steps that we've taken to resolve it, and just leave it at that someone seeing that conversation will say, okay, it's been addressed, and they don't have that emotional tie-in that will continue the situation. Another question from our chat says, for businesses, do you recommend using Pinterest to send users to other sites that are not your own site? I know it gets a lot of click-throughs, but seems like a waste of time if not to our site. All right, that makes a lot of sense, except that one thing you want to remember from our dialogue last week. Last week we said to be human, and the way that Pinterest is used by people that are on Pinterest is to pin lots of things, not just your own stuff. And so a big part of this, I think, is to act like a human would in that space, including pinning other companies' things and sometimes directing people elsewhere. So I know of an example, Whole Foods. Whole Foods features a lot of their great products, very visual environment. We eat with our eyes, and so it's a big plus for Whole Foods. But what Whole Foods also knows about their customers is that often they like to cook, that they're interested in gourmet foods, that they like the visual of a kitchen. They like to spend time preparing food. And so they will pin content of what a great kitchen looks like or how to have a gourmet kitchen. They'll do cooking technique videos from other sources. All of those things pertain to foods, but not specifically Whole Foods content. Right. And so in that sense, it's fine to use other people because nobody would expect Whole Foods to be able to design a great kitchen, but they would see it important to Whole Foods to have a great kitchen.
Yes, you make solid points there. Yeah. I think that's a great example. We have one more question that came up from Jessica Martinez.
All right, Jessica.
You know Jessica. How are you guys dealing with all the controversy on the internet regarding like ESPN and Fox News and students at Bradley Kaboom? This has been fun. It really is. The thing that we are facing now, I believe, from our perspective, my perspective at least, is we have now, given the Bradley community something that we haven't had in close to 15 years. Okay, and there's been a process to go along with it. But I think the challenges we're facing now is not everybody that's critiquing it know all the stories that go behind it. And so until people really get the information, they study and they read the articles that are being said about where Kaboom comes from, the name. Yep. It says, unless you're a Bradley alum and you listen to 1470 WMD and Dave Snell, you're probably a little bit confused. Right. And a lot of people don't know there's gargoyles all across Hayden Clark Alumni Center, where we are now, and Bradley Hall. So it's actually bringing a mascot to the university, attributing to some of the traditions we have. And it's a little bit different. It's a change. I mean, and we're facing it. And I think once people are informed about it, and ways we can do that in social media and news, I think it will be as fun as it has been already. I mean, it's not really troubling times. So what are your thoughts? Do you have any?
No, I think all the credit to JD. He's had a busy week with the process leading up to the mascot and then everything that's been happening since the mascot was unveiled Saturday night. So it's been quite a week for you.
Yeah, it's been fun. I mean, another example is this SIA comes out and says it's a terrifying mascot, and you have 100 children lined up to go meet the gargoyle. I mean, how terrifying is it? If you're terrified of it and a 3-year-old isn't, maybe we have our facts a little wrong. I know it's an opinion. So it's been fun to monitor. So we have another question.
Okay. Should you automatically follow back, or should you be more choosy, like only alumni or brand evangelists? That's a good one. I think it is a bit a matter of personal practice and kind of who you are. I have an interesting conundrum also if students choose to follow me, whether I should follow them back. And I've kind of thought that perhaps, if they're okay with hearing what I have to say on Twitter, for instance, that it's okay for me to hear what they have to say. And I think in general, Twitter etiquette would say, that this is a give and take, that if somebody finds you valuable enough to listen to, that you would in turn find something in value from them. Now, I'll also say that I personally, if I get a new follower and I see that they have social media something or other in their title, I figure, they might have Googled or searched me a little bit and found out that I have social media something or other in my title, and that's maybe why they're choosing to follow me.
Yeah. We have an example I tell our admissions representatives when they join the team. It talks about following back the quality people. When I get followed by somebody that I don't know, but maybe they have something in common, they found something that in the profession, but they have 10,000 followers and they're following 10,000 people as well. Yeah. They're not going to pay attention to me, and I'm not going to pay attention to them. I just know they're just trying to gain followers. And so they follow people in hopes to get a follow back. And it doesn't appeal to me. Obviously it's working if you can put your message out in front of 10,000 people. But when it comes back to the admissions reps, I said there's a great way to network on Twitter. And by doing that, there are particular hashtag discussions, like live chats. And in the higher ed community alone, you can use hashtag higher ed, EM chat, SA chat. EM chat is enrollment management chat, and they have a discussion every Thursday night at 9 o'clock Central or Eastern time at night. And so from that, they join different discussions every Thursday, and they join, and all pertains to enrollment management. At that point, you're now connecting, and that's where you can find that follow back. You can connect and network on Twitter in a great way to build up a quality audience in which the stuff you publish on Twitter and the stuff you read from them are, they attribute to what you guys do for a living, that 8 to 5 schedule and even more. So those are one ways we can separate ones you should follow back right away and not. Yeah, that's one example for sure.
Great example.
Now, one more thing I want to mention, and I know you have some experience in this, especially you teaching your students, is the monitoring tools that we have. We have never really tapped into what exactly we use to monitor when talking about people who mention us and then those who are talking about us, but not necessarily reaching out to us through a mention or a tag or anything like that. There are a couple here that we've used here. One is TweetDeck and Hootsuite. Those are the two big ones I hear. There's also, I think, Vocus and Radian 6.
Yep. And it's always a matter with monitoring how much capability you need, also financially what kind of commitment you're willing to make. So you can monitor at a low level with TweetDeck and Hootsuite for free. And so if you're just a startup business or kind of trying to build the business and don't have a lot of extra resources financially, those are some great tools to use. And then on the pricier side, you can have advanced levels of Hootsuite. Radian 6 is another good one. And all of those generate a lot of different ways for you to monitor and find out what people are saying about you, and not just about you, but everything that relates to your business, to your industry, to people that are professionals and experts in that particular category. I think that's a good way of generating.
Absolutely. I think it's a great one. We have one last question, I believe. Any advice for someone wanting to create a webinar for their own business? Let's see here.
Hire John.
Hire John. Hire John.
No, we want him. Hire somebody like John.
Yeah, exactly. I would research your options first, especially on a budget. I mean, if you're on a budget, there's certain services that you can use. Like a GoToMeeting is possible as well. A lot of those do large webinars. Webcasts are much different, and we have have a great opportunity to do that here. It's not always feasible somewhere else. Right. But to research what what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, the message, and then I would reach out to people who have done it already as well and see what they've learned, and then that way you can execute without the mistakes that some people have probably already made.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you want to pay attention, participate in webinars so that you can do a great job on the other side and run your own. All right, it looks like we've run out of time. If we haven't answered your question yet, JD and I will be happy to follow and contact you, be in conversation with you on Twitter afterwards. Thank you for all of your continued discussion and questions today. This is what makes the webcast fun for us. Yes,
thank you to all those who have joined us today and last week. Some of you have joined both days, and we thank you very much for your interest and support.
JD and I would also like to extend a big thank you to the Bradley University Alumni Association for hosting these webcasts for us. And we would like to extend a big thank you to our producer and director, John Greenhoe, for his valued talent and expertise. Without him and his interns behind the scenes, you'd be looking at PowerPoint slides through GoToMeeting. And so a job well done by his entire crew. Right. And finally, we want to give a special thanks to Shane Gear in our Bradley IT department, who helped make this live stream possible, as well as Bradley's Web Communications Director, Jim Crone.
Thank you for joining us today. From all of us at the Hilltop, #thank you for joining us.